Really good to be here. Kind of like the space. A little bit unconventional. Don't really know what's going to happen, right? And that's fundamentally, in some senses, the message of this whole session. Don't know what's going to happen. When things are emergent, you don't know. And what do we do about that? How do we live with that? What's our relationship to not knowing? So far, we've heard, I think, one of the reactions to not knowing, and that reaction is, I'd like to know. And I'd like to make sure that what happens is something I know. That's a familiar, dominant reaction. But perhaps in the presence of that bet, the bet that you've made to be here. But the bet that you've made to be here has another component to it, which is you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how you're going to feel. We do know that everybody in the room is going to feel slightly differently because you're all different. You had different things for breakfast, or you woke up in the morning in a different way. And so we know that there's nothing in this room except difference and not knowing, even though you're here and you made a bet. So they coexist at the same time, knowing and not knowing. So in this session, we want to explore that, relate to it from the point of view of how the future is used. We've heard about imagination. We've heard about the way humanity has this tremendous capacity to imagine. I don't think we've yet heard that much about the diversity of the ways in which we imagine. And one of the key connections here is if we're simultaneously making bets and sitting here, right now, you can't be somewhere else, you're here. And you can't go back in time and decide to go somewhere else. So you've made an irrevocable bet. But at the same time as you've made that irrevocable bet, you're also not knowing, because you don't know how this is going to turn out. What that suggests is that there's two different ways of imagining. The way that you imagine to be here, right now, is a bet. But the way that you imagine what you don't know and what you're going to learn, if you decided in advance, you wouldn't need to be here because you'd already know. So why bother? So in fact, not knowing and knowing coexist at the same time. And our imagination is what liberates us to make sense of that, to take advantage of that simultaneity of knowing and not knowing in a universe that is emergent, and a universe that is not, as far as humans are capable of knowing, deterministic. It is not causal. And just a little word, we had a talk about complexity before. There's lots of things that are very interesting about complexity, but I think one of the important aspects about this universe is that it is complex, meaning it is not deterministic. It cannot be known in advance. Even if you had perfect information and a perfect model and the perfect calculating computer, this is not a universe which is predictable. It cannot be predicted. That is the meaning of complexity. And that's not something new, and it's not something that gets more or less. It just is. So as we live in this complex universe where emergence, knowing and not knowing, irrevocable bets and openness coexist, can we cultivate our imagination to allow us to take advantage of that richness, that difference, instead of being afraid of difference, instead of finding, oh, let me make sure there is no difference. Things go over and over, continue, repeat, repeat, repeat. Instead, we come to appreciate difference, cultivate difference, use difference for resilience. And those are the stories we want to share with you today. We have two fantastic storytellers with us, Ramila and Kewulay. And I'm going to start with Ramila and turn it over to you to share with the crowd here your experiences, your relationship to emergence.
Yes, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yes? All the way back? Okay, good. Thank you. I'm going to share with you a story which is quite personal, but I promise you I will build the bridge to why we're here. And it starts actually with the story of my journey. Originally, I'm from Iran. I fled the country in 2000, which is almost 25 years ago. And all of a sudden, I was in a foreign country being a refugee, not knowing exactly what the terminology means. I was 8 years old back then. And actually not knowing the true meaning of being a foreign person in a different country. And actually, that is where everything started for me when it comes to emergence and not knowing. We lived in these circumstances of being a refugee for 7 years. 7 years, 24 hours a day, I was living in circumstances of uncertainty, just not knowing what will happen tomorrow, just not knowing what the next step would be. And to be honest with you, as a kid, it was very difficult, especially when you have had the good circumstances that you had in your home country. You had to go elsewhere because you weren't safe. Not going to bother you with why we had to flee the country, but so all of a sudden I had to deal with this sort of uncertainty. And when we talk about imagining futures, to me at that point, I was not able to imagine tomorrow. Survival doesn't allow you in these kind of circumstances to really imagine different things, what I hope for. Actually, I was afraid. I didn't dare to be hopeful, because now, reflecting on it, being in the futures field, I can say that the reason why I didn't dare to do this was because I lived through this unconscious narrative, a myth of when you imagine futures, when you imagine something else, automatically you have to create it. Otherwise, you will be disappointed. So you expect something and it doesn't turn out the way you would like it to be, then it can feel very, as a rejection of the universe, or really a disappointment. So fast forward, after 7 years, we finally got the permission to stay, which was a moment of pure, true joy. If I think about it, with my parents and my sister. And then all of a sudden, there were possibilities. So from that on, I got the opportunity to go to university, to study, one of the first women in my family who got the opportunity, again, something unimaginable from the context where I'm from, that as a woman you can get proper education and just do something with your life. And then during my master's program, I got the amazing opportunity to learn about futures literacy. It was a course run by my dear colleague, now Loes Damhoff. I was one of the first, we always say the guinea pig of the cohort, to learn about futures literacy. And that brought me to the field of futures and future studies. And what we do now, being part of the UNESCO Chair on Futures Literacy, is that we create these learning spaces for students, faculty, but also for the outside world, outside of our university. Learning spaces in where we do not do the planning preparation part of futures, so not the foresight part, but just a different way. An invitation to explore for novelty and to be open and to practice emergence. What does it mean to not know? What does it mean to be open? And how can you prepare yourself or actually train yourself in opening up and changing your behavior towards future? When I look at my view and my behavior towards futures, it was very much from a place of fear because of survival. And that's good, because we need that. We need to survive, you know? It's a biological mechanism within us that protects us. But I also learned that there is another way on how we can approach futures, which is more active, is imagining multiple futures to see the present anew, to see the present differently. And I wanted to end up my little talk, my story, with also quoting my dear colleague on that what we do in the present, we don't know how it impacts the future. But what we know is how we envision the future. That's what matters. That impacts the present, it changes the present. So I wanted to leave it to this. Thank you. Thank you.
Kewulay. Yes. Man, you want that one?
Good afternoon. My name is Kewulay Fina Kamara. Fina is a tradition, it's a lineage of storytellers. And I happen to be the 27th that we know of that generation, of that tradition. Today, I want to tell a couple of stories quickly. And they have to do with knowing and not knowing, as my brother here have just said. That knowing is really not knowing. Seeing is really unseeing. Because when you see, as we see, in all kinds of ways, as we perceive, whether in science or anything of the sort, we are actually unseeing other things. So there's a simultaneity in that as well, as my brother is saying. But from our traditions also, we understand that there are many occupants in this world, in this universe, that are around that we all don't see. Some of them we do see, some of them we don't see. But that means also there are different ways of knowing. So in terms of thinking about future or present, we may have to try to think about other ways of knowing and valuing other ways of knowing, especially ways that we are not familiar with. I want to tell a song, and you have to participate in doing this, a song, you know. But you have to say, and I want to hear everybody, because everything I'm going to do today is you and I are telling this story together. So you have to participate. So say, Balolo. 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 So every time I go like this, you go what? Every time I go like this, you say go what? Balolo. Okay. Yilimanko, mansa, Yilimanko. Yilimanko, mansa, Yilimanko. Lo, Yilimanko, mansa, Yilimanko. Ha. Yilima, taura, la, mansa, Yilimanko. Lo, Yilimanko, mansa, Yilimanko. Lo, Yilimanko, mansa, Yilimanko. Palo, Yilima, taura, mansa, Yilimanko. Okay. You say, expectation. Disappointment. Expectation. Disappointment. Every time you make expectations, you will always come balolo with disappointment. The king had expectations, but things didn't go the way the king wanted them to go. Balolo. The river is supposed to flow in one direction according to people, but then it starts flowing in another direction. What do you get?
Balolo.
So at least we anticipate that things can go any way in life. The second story I want to tell you is the story that we storytellers tell ourselves. And maybe the story I'm going to tell you may be familiar to some of you in different ways. But stories are materials. As my elder brother taught me, stories are seeds. They are not telling you everything. They are the things that you use to explore. You have to expand on them. You have to dwell on them. You have to think about them. So the story my brother tells me is this story. He said, the earth and the sky had a quarrel. And the earth was saying, I am Duga. Everything falls down. Everything rises from me, gives birth to everything. The trees grow. The animals roam. The human beings live. And then they all pass away, and I take them all back in. I am the greatest. So the guy says, hey, I am the greatest. Look at the vast expanse. Look at all the stars, all the beings that are in the sky. I am the greatest. So they were having this argument. So the creator of the heavens and the earth and all the things that are in within and without was called to say something between these two people or these two beings. And he said, the earth is great. So there was a planet called Mars. It was much bigger than the earth. He says, how can that be? So some beings on Mars decided to come down to earth. And when they came down to earth, this being was so big, the little toe of this being that came from Mars stepped on the earth and covered the whole surface of the earth. So how can this be? How can they say this little thing here is great? So this being went back off to the sky and to Mars to tell that, look, that place is so little, it's nothing at all. So all of a sudden, the beings on Mars were looking down, and they were looking down, and all of a sudden they saw a smoke, a tiny, weeny smoke. Follow? And this smoke started crawling around, rising into the skies, and came around Mars. And then by this time it's turned into something like the equivalent of a python, and wrapped itself around this huge planet over and over and over until it covered it all and just rested its head on top of it like this. How mighty is this earth, this planet that you call Mars, that you think is so greater than the earth, from which the smoke of verse has just come and coiled around and covered it all. So while the snake itself, the snake of verse that wrapped itself around this planet was boasting in its power, guess what happened? A little snake, a small little snake that he was not aware of came into his nostril. It got into the nostril and danced in the nostril and danced in the nostril and then escaped it through the tail of it. Then the master of the planet woke the snake up. You were here sleeping, a little snake, a tiny snake just came through your nose and crawled itself around you and went out. And that big snake of us said, what? A little snake did that? I am going to eat that snake, I'm going to swallow it up. So he uncoiled itself and started following the little snake. And the little snake saw a pond and jumped into the pond. So the big snake came and saw that this little snake has jumped into the pond, so he jumped after it. But after it jumped, the big snake jumped into the little pond. The little pond was a big mouth of a frog. A frog, remember, usually snakes eat these frogs, but this time the frog's mouth was open and the big snake that just came ran into this thing, into this pond, and the frog closed his lips and said, I have had my breakfast for the day. So, my friends, this story I can go on for all night telling you this, but let me just stop so far. That in fact, whenever you think something is one way, there's always another way. Whenever you think that you see something, there's always another seeing. Whenever you think there's another one method, there's always another method. Whenever you think there is one being or something, there's always more and more and more and more and more and more. And some we see and some we don't. Some are so big we can't see them. Some are so small we can't see them. So whatever we see, whatever we're seeing, just to remember there's always something else, something living, something right. So before I close my story, you can't do anything without you have to pour a little water to all the great spirits that made it possible for you and me and everybody here to be here today. So we can think about the ancestors. So we usually pour libation to the ancestors. We pour water here. But I see that somebody did a beautiful graphic here, and I see water flowing all over the place. So I don't have to pour water. But normally we pour water to the ancestors, to all the people and the beings, not just people, the trees that made it possible for us to be here today. The waters that made it possible for us to be here today. The animals that made it possible for us to be here today. All of the things and beings that sacrificed for us to be here today. We want to pay libation. What does it mean? You give life to life. We tell their story. We talk about them. We honor them. Men and women, children, elders, beings and non-beings, living things and non-living things. We pour libation that when we gather here, when we gather together as human beings, we have the humility of the Creator. And let us have fun. Let us have fun, because playing and seriousness are the same. Let us have serious play. Thank you.
I'd like to actually try and draw more of you into the stories, because I'm sure that everybody here has these stories. Stories that are a libation to the ancestors that is not cumulative, that is not, oh, I'm carrying the weight of my ancestors. My ancestors tell me this, my ancestors tell me that, and I must repeat it. Those are not the ancestors that Kewulay was making reference to. Those are the ancestors that are just there, because otherwise we wouldn't be here. But they have no expectations of us. we don't have to carry them as a burden. Do people have stories where you feel that you have the ancestors? We heard it about farming earlier, where the practices of farming are part of who you are, but it's not, in some senses, through worshiping or preserving or continuity. Anybody have a story of feeling continuity and discontinuity at the same time? The fact that we're here is the continuity, but the discontinuity is that we're doing it completely differently in our own way. And that in fact, we don't have any choice because we can't be the past and we can't be like somebody else. We can only be ourselves. Story, anybody want to share? Yeah. Good.
It's not exactly a story, but also poses a question, which has been in my mind for a while. Also, but puts the paradox of continuous or discontinuous. So I come from India, and there are a lot of, India is a storehouse of arts and ancient crafts as well. There is a style of painting, which is called Varli painting, pretty popular. Tribals used to paint the style where human beings being drawn in triangles, geometric figures, let's put it, simplified geometric figures. People are used to seeing these geometric figures in a certain way, and there is a whole section which believes that we have to preserve the art as it is. Don't change the style, don't change the color, don't change the motifs. One of the artists started drawing computers with these ancient figures. Because the artist is living in today's world, and he sees computers, laptops being used. He drew the pictures as it is, but there was also a computer along with this. And there was a huge uproar. Okay? Do we preserve them as it is? So there is a section which feels this is like fossilizing the art, versus others say that this is a dynamic flow of water. It must flow on, things should change. And I'm sure many other people have these kind of questions with respect to their art and stories related to it. Should we change? Should we let it change? Or should we keep these craftsmen, folks, fossilized as they are in the past?
Wonderful question and good story, a good example of this tension. And let me pick up the thread there, because I think that there's an interesting dimension to the second presentation that we had in today's forum about the Library of the Future and Jonathan Keats' clocks, which is the plurality of temporalities. There are many kinds of time, not just one. And I think that the preservation versus change, the continuity versus discontinuity, the repetition versus difference, is really one of those fundamental aspects of how we relate to time. How do we use time? How do we think of the relationships that we're continuously constructing with different kinds of time, which is also the ancestors, which is also the limbo that Ramila was talking about when she arrives in the Netherlands and you're in between. But oftentimes we're in between in many different ways, in different phases and stages of our life. In the same day you can be in between. And in the same day you can have many temporalities. So to go back to the question of capability and competence, but also to go to the question of what makes it so difficult in some ways for us to feel at home, comfortable, secure in these multiple temporalities and in this not knowing. What makes us comfortable and uncomfortable? How do we balance the hopes and the fears? And I think that in some senses at the root of this is an issue of respect. Respect in some senses for ourselves as living beings, but in a more broad sense, a respect for the universe, a respect for where our home. Because our home is like this. Our home is complex. And if we try to control and to colonize, if we separate ourselves and say we're superior and say we're able to determine, if we say, as has already been said today, that humans create the future, are humans really shaping the future? If we have that pretension, I think it makes it much more difficult for us to learn and to live the many temporalities, to live the many different ways of seeing, to understand, and most everybody here is familiar with it, the idea that there's not just one way to know. There's not just one kind of map, and there's not just maps for thinking about the world and understanding the world. There's the feelings that we have. There's the multidimensional perceptions, the knowing and not knowing, the things that are at the borders, the things that are in the periphery of our vision, the things that don't exist and that we invent together. And there's the ephemerality of it. And think about it for a moment. The word civilization conjures up Machu Picchu, or the Great Wall of China, or the pyramids in Giza. Civilization. Those are tributes to the idea of permanency, to things that are durable, that last. They are expressions of a desire for eternity, for immortality, for absolute truth. And in some ways, very comforting, because they do last a long time. But that ambition to repeat, to defend, to construct, also makes it very difficult for us to be at home in this universe. And today, in this museum, at this moment in time, with the political, the economic, the social changes that we see, the disappointments, the many disappointments, people might be aware of the Pact for the Future that was signed at the UN. It's a beautiful document. For me, personally, deeply disappointing. Wonderful things are being said, which have no relationship to the world that we know. And why do we reproduce? Why do we reproduce oppression? Why do we reproduce things that our commandments and our human rights say we should not reproduce? Why do we reproduce it? Why does it get repeated over and over again? And I think here again, the root, and we can find it in the stories that we're told, that those stories offer us a different way of understanding what it means to be human. And that the challenge we face today is as profound as that. What does it mean to be human? Does it mean to be even greater in the sense of our own grandiosity at controlling tomorrow? To become even stronger builders of tomorrow's future? Is it to impose our burdens? You have to repair this. You have to make sure that this is sustained. You have to worship this statue. To burden the future with our world? To be heavy? Or to think of it in a different way? To think rather about the potential for the gift to be lightness. And in that sense, I think we saw in the stories that you can let go. That you can let go of the idea of imposing, the idea of colonizing the future. Questions? Yeah, I've got questions. I got 1, 2.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear me, so yes. Just a comment on what you were saying and building
Just
up on
want to say your name and just
Okay.
so we know who you are.
My name is Felipe. I am from Chile, which is a country, small country in Latin America. But I migrated to England to do my PhD. and I've been there for a few years now. And I wanted to complement that idea of the stories and how stories allow us to think otherwise and what we have been trained and what we're prepared to think about with our stories. And I like the songs, the song Balolo that we were singing, because I think it kind of exemplifies what we're able and what we have built in our lifetime. So in Latin America, we have this tradition, literary tradition called magical realism, which is amazing. If anyone has the opportunity of reading 100 Years of Solitude, highly recommended. Basically, in our continent, magical things can happen. The unexpected can happen, and it happens. And out of nothing, wonderful things appear, and we make it happen. It's a very much can-do attitude, but it's deeply embedded in our literature. We know, we've read about this. We know that these things can happen. And then you move to England, where nothing can happen, right? Well, a few things can happen. They can leave the European Union for once. But it has to do with structures and constraints and rhythmical things and Shakespeare and whatever, right? It's not less beautiful, but it's different. And it allows you to think different things. And no wonder why, and you were talking about stories, it's very much a shock because you can take the Latin out of Latin America, but you cannot take Latin America out of the Latin, right? So you go to a country and you think, oh, we could do this and that, and they go like, no, it doesn't work like that. You need these structures, you need this bureaucracy. But in my country, in my context, magical things can happen, and they happen every day. But we have been trained to think like that. We have examples, we have stories.
I just wanted to share something small, if you don't mind. It's a story that came out of some research that we did in my village. And my village is in Sierra Leone, and just getting there is a big problem, okay? Just getting over 18 miles is going to take you 2 hours driving. But we were there, we asked the question, we were trying to find out what people were thinking about the future and how they were thinking about the future, and about the problems that usually are discussed in these hallowed places of, about climate change, environmental destruction, etc. And we asked people what they think about these issues. One sister told us a story I want to share with you quickly. It's a quick story. They had gone into the bush during the mango season to collect mango. So they go to the to the bush, and they see a mango tree that's had a lot of ripe mangoes. So normally you'll see a lot of mangoes at the bottom that had fallen. That's how they were going to collect. But in this case, this mango tree was standing on a pond. And this pond was very, very dark. And the women wanted the mangoes. But they were afraid because they didn't know what's inside that pond. It could be anything. It could be a snake. It could be, a scorpion. It could be anything. So they what to do? They went from what they knew, which is that wherever you are, there are no empty spaces. There are always beings. Any space you can think of is the home of somebody, of something. So they started to talk to the spirits that they can't see. That, hey, we just came in peace. We just want mangoes. We don't want anything else. We want to disturb anything. We just want to get into that, want to get those mangoes. And they stayed quiet for a little bit. This is the story they told us. They stayed quiet a little bit, and all of a sudden, the water started shaking, and what came out was a crocodile. Huge crocodile. Came out and walked away. The crocodile walked away. The woman got into the pond and got the mangoes and came home. I say, what do you make of it? He said, you have to respect the things that you see and even the things that you do not see. You have to understand that you are not the only beings in this world. That wherever you are, there are occupants. There are no empty spaces. So, this may not, to me, to you, it may not be something that speaks eloquently about the future and how to anticipate and all that stuff, but it does tell me what I can do, how I can behave on a day-to-day basis that respects the things that I see and the things that I don't see. Thank you.
I think we have very little time. We have two more interventions and then a third. So, Luz?
My name is Luz Damhoff. I'm a colleague of Ramila. And I wanted to share this story that speaks to difference and repetition. And it's a very small, intimate story. And maybe it illustrates how we can bring these thoughts to our daily lives. This is not my story. It's from a friend of mine. He's a philosopher. Craig Slee is his name. And he's in a wheelchair. He's paralyzed, and it's sometimes a struggle for him to do something simple as reaching for a mug of coffee and bring it to his mouth because of his spasms. And for the longest time, he would get really frustrated and see it as a failure to do this activity that is a repetition of something that should be so simple. But the moment he decided that it's not just to not see it as a repetition, but as something completely new, a new experience or a new activity, that he managed to let go of disappointment and expectation, but also a sense of failure. And it really changed how he saw our connection, our attachment to improvement, to do the same thing, to make something better. And I think it's maybe an invitation to all of us to, even in daily practices or daily activities, that there's always an invitation to see it as a new experience, and therefore see an invitation to break repetitions and old patterns. Just want to share that story.
I'm Andrea from Argentina. Me va a traducir Priscila. Bueno, vine con una exposición de arte puesta. She came with an art exhibition on. El dibujo acompaña al ser humano desde hace 30.000 años y facilitó que pueda construir todo lo que nos rodea, la ropa, los autos, los edificios. The drawing accompanies us for 30,000 years, and it enabled us to build everything that we know, from automobiles, clothing, and all the building environment. Porque todo lo que existe, todo lo que hemos creado, primero lo dibujamos. Y partimos en la infancia dibujando, y dejamos de dibujar más o menos a los 10 años por vergüenza. So everything that we build, we start by drawing, and we draw since we are little kids. But we stop drawing as we grow up because we become ashamed of what we are doing. Entonces, vengo a invitar, considerando que los niños, aunque no tengan para comer o no tengan recursos, siempre están dibujando escenarios de futuro y soñando lo que pueden llegar a ser. The kids are drawing all the time, even when they don't have conditions, they don't have sometimes what to eat, they are drawing and they are imagining how the future can be. Inclusive siendo un puente que une culturas, porque yo no hablo inglés, pero vengo con algo visual. Including as we can use that to bridge cultures, as she is not speaking English, but she can. Se puede incluso dibujar sobre la arena, se puede dibujar sin nada, o sea, sin ningún recurso y sin saber hablar. You can draw with anything, in sand, in the streets, even without any resources. Vengo a invitar a que volvamos a tomar la herramienta del dibujo que acompañó al ser humano desde siempre para seguir imaginando lo que queremos construir. She wants to invite everyone to keep drawing so we can build together the future that we want to build.
Thank you. And so maybe to end on the kind of a very pragmatic note, because it's something that we experience very, very directly. Ramila, in the daily life, sometimes how does this manifest in your experience?
Yes, so what we see working with youth and students that everything that is happening around you can really affect your daily life. So, and the fear and anxiety, those are not bad emotions. I just want to put it there. But I think it's very important to know, if we want to, empower generations as well, to really try to help them to rethink and reframe these emotions into something different, something that can, be more hopeful. And I really like that there is a lot of stories here, or different angles when we talk about imagining. And I was listening, and we're not talking a lot about, we're really in the present. And I really like to invite you to do that as well, to rethink what we do in the present. And I think that decisions that we make here in the now really are very important, to really be considerate of whose future are we creating. Because I'm not a believer in creating futures. I don't think that we as humans are capable of such thing. But I do believe that as a collective, we can do things in the present. And and also an invitation to do more things in collective. Yeah.
Thank you.
No
Yeah,
problem.
thank you. Okay, I think we're going to wrap. If I were to offer one takeaway, and it's kind of meant to be a little bit of a counterintuitive, or a punctuation, a syncopation. Every time you get the feeling that we're being called upon to be responsible for the future, to create the future, see if you can't find some dose of humility and say, uh-oh, what's that really mean? What's really going on when I'm thinking of creating the future, dominating the future, when I'm reducing my imagination to a goal that I want to achieve? And instead, try and flip it around and say, how is that image of the future, how is the future that I'm imagining at the moment allowing me to understand the richness of the present? And that's not a sense of denying the importance of thinking about the bets we're going to make. So what we want to build and what we construct. But here's my kind of parting sense of why this is important. The inertia, the incredible pressure that we feel for continuity to sustain these immensely heavy and destructive civilizations seems untenable. And it's not like you can turn it on or off, because it's hugely powerful. But the transition and the planting of seeds of something different, I think, passes through the cultivation, the nourishing of our imagination, and using our imagination to allow us to break the cycle of recreating on the basis of the past, and liberating ourselves from the burden of determining the future, and having confidence instead, real confidence, that the gift we give is for the future to figure it out itself, and not for us to try to preempt that. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the session, and I look forward to more conversations. Thank you to Ramila and Kewulay.